Good morning, it's Wednesday the 25th of October in London. This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, Israel demands the head of the United Nations resigns over comments he made about the Hamas attack. Cloud computing delivers differing forecasts for the tech giants Microsoft and Alphabet. And the UK is scrapping its cap on bankers' bonuses. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Israel's ambassador to the United Nations has called on the head of the UN to resign. The demand came after Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' speech at a Security Council meeting to discuss the Israel-Hamas war. Here are the key moments from that address.
I have condemned unequivocally the horrifying and unprecedented 7 October acts of terror by Hamas in Israel. Nothing can justify the deliberate killing, injuring and kidnapping of civilians or the launching of rockets against civilian targets. It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people.
Antonio Guterres' remarks led the Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen to cancel a meeting with the UN Secretary-General. The country's ambassador Gilad Erdan accused Guterres of downplaying the Hamas attacks.
The UN is failing, and you, Mr. Secretary General, have lost all morality and impartiality. When you say those terrible words that these heinous attacks did not happen in a vacuum, you are tolerating terrorism.
Gilad Erdan's response highlights the growing diplomatic tensions following the Hamas attacks on Israel, which killed about 1,400 people. Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry says retaliatory airstrikes have killed more than 5,000 there. Meanwhile, US intelligence officials are said to have determined that Israel wasn't behind a large explosion at a hospital in Gaza last week. The Washington Post reports analysts have, quote, high confidence that the fatal rocket was fired from within Gaza and then malfunctioned. The blast killed as many as 300 people and derailed US President Joe Biden's planned visit to Jordan to meet with Middle Eastern leaders. Deutsche Bank has reported a small beat on its net revenue in the third quarter, coming in at €7.13 billion. That's some 20 million higher than expected. Fixed income trading was slightly lower than forecast at €1.9 billion. Deutsche says it expects full-year revenues at its investment bank to be slightly lower than last year, but with higher litigation charges. Santander, meanwhile, has reported net income for the third quarter, beating the average analyst expectations. The Spanish banking giant posted net income for the quarter of €2.9 billion. That's €110 million up on the Bloomberg consensus estimate. The lender says it remains on track to meet 2023 targets. The positive results come just one day after another of Europe's big lenders, Barclays, lowered its forecast for lending profitability, leading to volatile moves in the UK bank's share price. Microsoft has posted its strongest sales increase in 6 quarters. The story now from Bloomberg's Charlie Pellet.
Microsoft was bolstered by recovering cloud computing growth amid demand for new AI products that are prompting corporate customers to shift back into spending mode. Revenue in the fiscal first quarter, which ended September 30th, rose 13% to $56.5 billion, topping analysts' average projections. CEO Satya Nadella is revamping the company's entire product suite, including Office, Windows, Search, and security software, to add features based on open AI technology. In New York, Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
Meanwhile, Alphabet shares fell in after-hours trading after its key cloud unit reported a smaller than expected profit. Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow explains.
Although Alphabet beat top and bottom line on all of its other divisions, there was strength in search, advertising, stabilization and resilience in YouTube ads as well. There's still this concern that cloud is really central to Google's future growth. And in that area of cloud, it still is a distant third behind Amazon AWS and Microsoft Azure.
Now, Ludlow spoke to Alphabet President Ruth Porat, who told him the cloud unit's sales had been affected by some customers cost-cutting. The third giant in the cloud space, Amazon, is set to report tomorrow. Now to US politics. Trump ally Mike Johnson is the latest Republican to attempt to be the next Speaker of the House. The Louisiana representative is the fourth nominee in 3 weeks as Republican infighting leaves the legislative chamber rudderless. He promised this time will be different.
You're going to see this group working like a well-oiled machine.
Johnson's nomination comes after former President Trump torpedoed the previous candidate's chances yesterday. Mike Johnson was involved directly in the campaign to invalidate the presidential election results, making moderate support difficult when he faces a House vote later today. And the UK government is scrapping the cap on bankers' bonuses and forcing plans unveiled by Liz Truss's government last year. The cap limiting bonuses to a maximum of twice a banker's base pay will be lifted at the end of this month. The Prudential Regulation Authority says banks will be able to pay staff as they like for the current financial year. Financial firms now face the challenge of how to cut elevated fixed pay to rebalance compensation packages towards discretionary bonuses. Those are your top stories on the markets. The MSCI Asia Pacific Index is up by 0.8%. The Nikkei in Tokyo is 1.2% higher. Eurostoxx 50 futures up by 0.1%, and the 10-year Treasury yield is a basis point higher at 4.83%. Well, let's turn to the latest news out of the Middle East next. Israel's ambassador to the United States calling for the resignation of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres after heated exchanges at the Security Council. This as the UN's aid agency in Gaza says it will run out of fuel by the end of today. Our head of Middle East and North Africa coverage, Stuart Livingston-Wallace, joins us now for more. Stuart, good morning to you. What happened at the UN Security Council that led to this call for the Secretary General's resignation?
Yeah, good morning, Stephen. Yeah, it was high drama. And I won't repeat the comments that were made by either side because you very cleverly had them earlier on. But I think it really highlights the challenges that we're seeing at the UN. I mean, if you think about the Secretary General's position, he's there to represent, or he's head of 193 members of that body. And obviously that includes Israel and its allies as well as adversaries such as Iran, not to mention, countries such as Egypt and Jordan that recognize Israel but have criticized its policies. So he's trying to tread a sort of a difficult line, and it's I don't envy him the position, I have to say. But I think more widely than that, again, it shows, I think, the tensions that we're seeing really at the international level. So we've had a sort of succession of global leaders that have come to Israel to sort of discuss the situation, to try and stop it escalating beyond the immediate conflict. And that really has involved just about everyone really on the international stage. And again, I think all of those leaders are trying to find what is the right language, what is the right line to take in terms of trying to contain the situation. Ultimately, I think that is the goal of all of them, is to stop it flaring up right across the region, because there is a real risk of that happening.
Yeah, and on that note, US diplomatic efforts are also continuing. Joe Biden talking to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman too. What did those leaders discuss? What emerged?
Yeah, I mean, I would say there was nothing particularly new that came out of those talks. Again, the focus really seemed to be twofold. Number one, contain the situation. How do we stop this spreading right across the Arab world, and then obviously into Iran as well? And then obviously the issue of aid getting into Gaza was certainly something the Saudis were pushing for. But again, sort of if we take a step back from that and think about, what are the implications for Saudi Arabia? This was a country that had not signed the Abraham Accords, that is sort of the recognizing and establishing diplomatic ties with Israel, but felt up until a few weeks ago that it was getting awfully close to that. So it does put Saudi Arabia in a difficult position, in that the Crown Prince had come out on US television several weeks ago to say, look, feels like we're making headway on this, we're making progress, and now finds himself in a position that is very, very difficult to navigate because of the situation on the ground. And again, emotions are running incredibly high on all sides with this particular conflict.
We've also been looking at the situation in Gaza, the small trickle really of trucks that have been allowed into the territory, 8 according to the Red Crescent in the latest convoy. What progress is being made on that front? There's some more warnings we've had about the humanitarian situation in the territory.
No, exactly. I mean, the short answer is not very much. And again, the context that you gave the trickle is absolutely spot on. You know, Gaza has in excess of 2 million people there. small convoys of aid are certainly very welcome, certainly very needed, but they don't really make a dent in the situation. And again, remember the electricity, or at least the power plant, the single power plant has been off for some time now, so they're relying on generators. There is fuel, but again, that will eventually run short. Gaza as a whole is a territory that basically has to import almost everything. There's not much in the way of agriculture or industry, so it is very, very reliant on those imports, and a few trucks coming across the border from Egypt help, but they're not really a solution.
Yeah, and certainly that warning from the aid agency, the UN's aid agency in Gaza, saying that they could run out of fuel as soon as today, which could stop their aid efforts, something that could complicate that further as well. To bring us back to the diplomacy then, you talked about the Western leaders who've been travelling to Israel. French President Emmanuel Macron was there yesterday as well. He also went to the West Bank to meet Mahmoud Abbas. Was Emmanuel Macron's commentary of note or different from those who came before him?
It was marginally different. So, again, not to exaggerate that it was wildly different, it certainly wasn't. And it's clear that the main focus and the main mission really was what we'd seen from the previous leaders, which was to try and sort of delay things a little bit and to contain the situation. We have actually lost count, because we were trying to add this up yesterday, of just how many leaders have been in over how many days. But it's been one a day for as long as, really as long as this has been going on. And so far, I think you could argue that they have been quite successful in delaying what felt a couple of weeks ago like an absolutely inevitable ground war. Now, I certainly think that is still, a fairly likely outcome. Certainly you can say it is one of the possibilities. So it's not like that has gone away. But it does feel like it is sort of delaying that. And that sort of allows more time to sort of think about, well, what is the situation? And fundamentally, what comes after. So what Macron said was a little bit different maybe, and I'm not saying that the other leaders have not mentioned this in private, but he was a bit more explicit about sort of calling, ultimately for a revival of the peace talks in the Middle East, and that, Palestinian statehood should be considered. That needs to be back on the table, and ultimately that would be for the benefit of everyone's security. So he did take a marginally different line, but I wouldn't want to exaggerate and say that it was wildly different to the rest. We have the Austrian Chancellor due in Israel today. Again, that's sort of the next leader coming up, and we'll see who comes after that. But again, so far, we did get some reporting from within Israel over the last few days that there is a little bit of a rethink about the scope of the ground war, but that is in no way to suggest that the ground war is completely off the table. I mean, I think, again, with 300,000 reservists called up, and obviously, again, after the atrocities that we saw on October 7th, I think a great the original goal of basically destroying Hamas, that doesn't feel like it's changed.
Okay, Stuart Livingston-Wallace, our head of Middle East and North Africa, thank you very much for bringing us up to date on that story. Let's go to Germany next, where even with one of the most powerful green politicians in charge, the country is failing on almost all of its climate targets. Bloomberg's Petra Sorga has been looking at the track record of Vice-Chancellor Robert Habeck, and she joins us now for more. Good morning to you, Petra. For context, first of all, what did Habeck's Green Party set out to achieve as part of the coalition in Germany?
Good morning. They definitely had a very ambitious goal, which was reaching the Paris climate goal, at least of bringing Germany on track of that. They were successful in the coalition treaties to actually write that there. And they have also wanted to reduce some of the heavy bureaucracy for renewables expansion. We had to double the speed of wind and triple for solar to reach 2030 climate targets. And there's also the goal that they had of accelerating coal phase out. Germany is very heavily dependent on fossil fuels. And instead of the current date, 2038, they wanted to move forward that date to 2030, ideally, as they wrote in the coalition contract.
So what's gone wrong then in their ambitions?
So for the last target for coal phase out, we don't see any more movement. We had at least one of the two big German coal miners has agreed to move that date forward, which is RWE. In the east, you don't see any progress. And we also see a much more heavy dependence on coal with the energy crisis and gas missing out and nuclear being phased out. This winter, we will see more lignite capacity back on the market. And that's, of course, one thing that is not on track. But many other things are not working out in other sectors, especially when you look at the housing sector. That was one of the most contentious this year. At the beginning of the year, Germany's climate minister, Robert Habeck, who's also the vice chancellor, proposed to ban new fossil fuel boilers from next year, which caused a national outcry because for the first time, climate policies were actually going to hit people's homes, people's heating. So he had to considerably roll back that law, and it's now reaching less, only 3/3 of the emissions targeted at the beginning. And we also had rollbacks in clean energy goals for municipal heating networks. The coalition also shelved plans for tougher efficiency standards in the houses. So that's been one of the main problems also.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond. Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa device. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.